Welcome to the University of Findlay Art and Culture Show. I am your hostess, Sharinda Welton, and I am excited to welcome to our set today, Mr. Adam Minnick. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you have a lot of exciting things to talk about. You are a man of many talents, and one of the most important things that you do on a daily basis is you work with our children.
I do, yes.
You're an educator.
I am. Yeah.
So where do you educate at?
I teach at a Catholic school down in Cincinnati called, it's called Annunciation Catholic School.
Okay.
And yeah.
What years do you work with?
I teach 4th through 6th grade.
So you teach 4th through 6th grade.
Like,
so at that point, there's not a specific area to teach, correct? Like
actually, I do language arts and social studies.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that teachers have it really easy. You have your summers off. You show up early in the morning, you work with the children, and then as soon as the bell rings, you have to sit at your desk for about 45 minutes, and then you get to run off and play and just work in your yard and putz around. Is that true or false?
That's very false. That could be more false than false. That's very false. Yeah, it's my days I get up at 6 in the morning, and I don't typically get home till about 10:30, 11, because I do the teaching, and then and I'm sure we'll get into it with the comedy. So I am running off to do an open mic. I at least try to get 2 in a night. Then I also host a podcast. So it's getting interviews with chefs and comedians, which is what my podcast features. And it's
so what is the name of your podcast?
It's called What the Fork.
Yes, I love that. It's so creative.
Yeah, it's a great name. It's very catchy, and yeah.
And you have a lot of comedians and a lot of chefs in the Cincinnati area.
Absolutely, yeah.
And even across the border in Kentucky, I'm guessing.
Yep, yeah. When I'm on the road for shows, I try to get chefs and comedians that come on. Sometimes it's just a chef or it's just a comedian. Yeah, I feel like keeping busy is the best way of carrying on your day-to-day business. So.
Well, and I have other friends that are stand-up comedians that also have been educators, and they pull a ton of their material from the classroom. And you don't do as much of that. You basically separate the two worlds. When I've watched your comedy in the past, and when I catch it online, it's your other lives that you're living. You keep that separated.
Yes, actually, I've been writing more and more about education, about teaching, and it's trying to incorporate that into the act, trying to find humor in that. I see it every day, but trying to write that down on paper and trying to get it out to the audience.
Where they can follow it, because they're not seeing it through your eyes in real time.
Right,
And that takes talent.
It does. I mean, there's some things I thought people would catch on. For example, we were talking about the Revolutionary War, and this is a 5th grade class. And I had talked about John Adams' cousin. They were good friends. He was a very smart man. He was also, a beer is named after this individual, and one of the students said Budweiser. I mean, but if I break it down as this, okay, friend, Bud, he's smart, wiser, but it just didn't translate that way to the audience. I thought it was funny, but most jokes I think is funny, they don't work.
So you work in the field of education. We now know you're a comedian and you're a host of a great podcast.
Yes.
But there is something else that you are very passionate about, and that is independent film.
Yes.
And you are a screenwriter, director, and producer of a film.
Yes.
And that is why you are here today. We had the opportunity to meet in Chicagoland a few years ago.
Yeah.
And we actually weren't there tied to film. It was tied to other parts of our world. But it came up in conversation, and it came up because of your passion for history, but also that history being very much a part of your specific family.
Yes. The film is called Forgotten.
And how do you say it? Because I've seen the picture of it in another language. Do you know how it's pronounced in the other language?
I do, and I haven't looked at that name in a while.
Oh,
so
no.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. Because it's really powerful with the white on black. Is it the Polish language?
It is a Polish. It's in Polish, yeah.
That's what I thought.
And I feel like an idiot now that I forgot the name.
I'm so sorry. Well, and I need to ask for forgiveness because I said I never set anybody up, and I just set you up. I'm so sorry. We'll edit that. Um, but anyways, it's called Forgotten.
Yes.
And there's a couple reasons for that, correct? With the the reason why it's called Forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about setting it up. The film is set in the 1940s.
Yeah, about 1939, 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it leads up through into about 1945, correct?
Yes, World War II, which 39 started then and then ended in 45. Yeah.
And the reason why this is special to you and near and dear to your heart is because the setting of the film is the concentration camps, but not for the reason that people would assume, which is for the Jewish communities.
Right.
This focuses on another community that was also part of the persecution of World War II.
Yes.
And part of our conversation was I was ashamed to admit that I didn't know that there were other individual communities affected by the Holocaust until I toured the museum in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow, yeah.
that was focusing on the Holocaust Memorial and everything that had happened. And so I was an adult when I learned that the Gypsies and some of the Catholics and even some of the individuals that had severe learning disabilities or impairments in walking and maybe sight, they were all communities that were negatively impacted by the Holocaust. And unfortunately, I didn't know that. And so when you started telling me about your grandparents' story, it reminded me that there are many forgotten individuals that we need to keep their stories alive for them.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing with Forgotten.
Absolutely. I feel like it's definitely a passion project, something I feel like I need to do, I want to do. There's so much about World War II that we don't know about, that people aren't talking about. For example, even with the Allies during the war, Australia and New Zealand have never been included in that count. South Africa, there's so many countries that came to the aid of the Allies. It's just overlooked. And in defense of textbooks, I mean, there's not enough time to cover all that, and it's so much information. But I just feel like there's a lot of groups that have been left out, have been forgotten through the war.
And the story of your grandparents is very special because I'm referring to them as your grandparents. So they're married and they've had family, but in so many of the films, you see that it is family together, sticking together, close friendships sticking together. Your grandparents didn't know each other. They had two very individual, horrific experiences that ended up in the end bringing them together. But they lived through the torment separately.
Yeah.
So your grandmother had gone to work for a German family, correct?
Yes, they owned a restaurant.
Yes, and so then when everything started getting really uncomfortable and tense, she decided it was time to try and get home.
Yeah, she wanted to go home to see family, so she snuck off at night.
Family,
She snuck off at night, and the fear was when the Nazis would come through, they would tell each family to volunteer one child. And so my grandmother volunteered to go work at this restaurant, and she was there for a time. I'm not sure how she was treated by the German people, the couple. So she escaped one night, went back to visit family, but she realized that anything the Germans did back then, they still do this. They keep record of everything. They're very organized, very they know what they're doing. And so she realized that her being with her family is a risk to the family. So she went back to the German couple, and then she was sent off to a slave camp.
So she turned herself in sacrificially out of love and devotion for her family.
Yes. And then she was sent off to a slave camp, and her diet was rotten chicken broth and sawdust. And then she barely survived. She survived only because the Nazi who was in charge of her area, the girls that worked in this slave camp, because they did the wiring on the bombers.
Okay.
And so he would sneak her a piece of bread once in a great while. But she went through some she was raped, she was abused, starved. So yeah, that was what she went through. Was I can imagine that's 6 years of her life taken.
And she didn't escape. She wasn't released for good behavior or anything. She was there until the actual invasion and the camp was shut down by the military.
Right.
And the military was the U.S.
Yes, the liberation. My grandmother and grandfather both loved America because American soldiers are the ones that liberated both their camps. And so yeah, they went to. She was placed in a refugee camp.
And so then let's talk about your grandfather's journey, because we've already mentioned that his was very different. He actually was captured by the Nazis.
He was.
But he spent a month in the woods because he had escaped and then got shot and was recaptured, correct?
Right. Well, Hitler and Stalin made a secret pact that Hitler would attack from the western side of Poland and Stalin would attack from the eastern side. There was a whole secret pact. Russia said they wouldn't, but they did. So my grandfather went and fought since my grandfather lived on the western side of Poland, he joined the military and went up against the Russians. Well, he was thrown into a Russian execution camp. He escaped after a few days, and then he spent a month in the forests of Poland, where he said...
And that was very common. There were people that were living in the forest, and these were very quiet groups.
Yeah, another part of the World War II you never hear about. But he just said whatever you found on the ground that wasn't rotten, that's what you ate. Like a dead horse, whatever wasn't rotten, that's what you ate. So then he was, after a month, was shot by a Nazi and then thrown into a prison camp until liberation in 1945.
And that's when your grandparents' story starts to work its way to a T where they get connected. And how they met, correct?
Yes. So they eventually met in a refugee camp, and I have met some of their friends who they were in the refugee camp with. And one lady, her last name is Kachuba. She, from last I've heard, I believe she's passed away since. But she got married in the camp, and her wedding dress is made from American paratrooper parachutes.
Wow.
Yeah. There was also in the camp, when they were in these prison camps, there were rosaries made out of bread. So. But yeah.
And you've mentioned rosary, and I've mentioned that they weren't Jewish. They were both Catholic.
Yes.
And so the Catholic community was very much under attack through World War II and leading up to World War II.
Yeah.
And so they found ways to survive and keep, basically in their private ways, continuing to fight for their freedom, for their faith and their religion.
Yes. And I've toured Auschwitz twice, and there was I remember this newspaper clipping on the wall in one of the buildings of Auschwitz, and it was Hitler saying he wanted to kill all Polish people all people of Polish descent, language, and ethnicity, and women, children, and men, women, and children. So yeah, I mean, in Poland it was Catholic and Jewish, and so there were priests. There were camps set up for priests. The intelligentsia. If you were a professor, they were taken off to these camps. So it is the second highest concentration of those who went to the camps. In all respect to the Jewish community, they were the highest amount. But yeah, so that's kind of the goal of this film, is to bring more, I guess, education.
And also to celebrate what your grandparents ended up finding and their friends ended up finding. And I say that from the point of that's not revealed in the film, but from your personal side, I say that because they went on to find safety and peace in Australia, correct?
Yes, they spent 4 years in a refugee camp, and then they had the option of coming to America or Australia. I think another option was Canada, but I don't think they wanted to go through another winter, a harsh winter. So, and at the time, everyone was coming to America, so you had to have written proof that you knew someone here, and they did not have proof. So they picked Australia. So they finally got placed in Australia. So they took a train from Germany, which is where they were in a camp, to the southern part of Italy, and then took a ship from Italy to a port in Australia called Fremantle, which is now a very beautiful neighborhood, but it was at the time it was just a port, and so that was close to the city of Perth, which is where they completely relocated and started life all over again.
And they wed when they got to Perth.
I believe they wed when they got to Perth, yeah. So.
And so you had the opportunity as a child to grow up and as you got older, hear the stories. But I remember when we first were talking about this, you had a very special gift bequeathed to you by your grandparents. And that was they saved many things through their experience that became the documentation that you ended up needing in the process of writing this film and creating it to make sure that it stayed real to their story. Yeah. And that is so special. I get goosebumps still thinking about that. Number one, because so many people that go through so much hardship and turmoil, they don't want to reveal that because of the pain they live with. Right. And so to share it with more family is, number one, entrusting, but number two, can be very painful.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they trusted you with their story, but then also knew that they saw the gift in you, maybe future.
Oh, yeah.
That you could share their story so it would never be forgotten. How special is that?
Yeah, and I had the opportunity, and my parents go back to Australia more often than I haven't gone back since, I think, 2011. But parents going back, able to meet with their friends, like talk to their friends and getting their stories from me.
And getting more documentation, yes.
And I remember when my grandfather passed away, we were going through his stuff to clean stuff out and organize, and I found it was a booklet that I never knew existed, but it was his work papers from Nazi Germany, saying basically work for Mother Germany.
Yeah.
And so,
how did that feel to hold that, knowing what we knew now? How did that feel, knowing that that was someone's life?
It was so, I don't know, it was very interesting, feeling kind of like I'm holding something my grandfather had when he was in the camps, that some monster, a Nazi would have given to him, handed to him. And this thing has years, it's older than I am. It's, and just like the words in it I had it translated, and I had the translation at home, and I wish I would have brought it. But it's just kind of, it's very dark and kind of twisted, the way that this is what they thought. I love the whole Jesse Owens story when he ran in the Olympics. Yeah. And right before the Third Reich, the rise of power, they were still in power, but Jesse Owens proving that this isn't the ultimate race. And my mother growing up with parents like that was told more stories than I was.
Sure.
Mom could never go to Auschwitz. She could never watch Schindler's List because she's like, I grew up these stories.
Real. Yeah,
But then in the defense of my grandparents, like they had no idea how to raise children. And my mother's stories of what it was like growing up was like her friends who had the same parents that went through the same experience. They had stories of camps and what life was like because their parents had no idea how to raise children.
Sure. Well, and there was probably that instilled fear. Yeah. They were probably very, very protective of their children. That would be very difficult. Yeah,
and my childhood is interesting because I was told to play the violin. I played 12 years, and my grandfather said, basically, in these camps, if you were a trained musician, played classical music, your life was slightly better than...
Yeah.
Because remember, at the entrance, I'm not sure how many people know this, but at the entrance of Auschwitz, they had a mini orchestra playing, and it was all prisoners, but life was slightly better. Because my grandfather's like, as bad as these people can be, they still like classical music. They still enjoy.
They wanted their entertainment.
Yeah. So that was always such an interesting take. And luckily, I still have my citizenship in Australia, and that's another reason. Like, if there's ever a war or something breaks out in one country, I can flee to another one because I'm already a citizen. I've got safety. So. And
those are things that a family that's lived through war would think of for their children.
Yeah.
And so when we think about that, you're not very old.
I'm 39 years old.
And you have that gift. But it lets us see how closely we are and not so far removed from that reality.
Right, yeah.
That was for you.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing film, and it's a gift that you are sharing with whomever wishes to watch it.
Yes.
You've had the opportunity to enter it into a very special contest.
Yeah, it was a film festival.
Yeah,
which we
and it
went-
was in New York City,
It was
correct?
in New York in November. It was
Yeah.
a New Filmmakers Film Festival, and it was cool. It was in Manhattan. By the way, you can get a studio apartment in Manhattan for $700,000. So
Did
FYI.
Did you get it? Did you get one for a couple of nights? And
we stayed at an Airbnb.
yeah,
and
so
that
you
was-
get to see it from that perspective.
Yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
I love New York, but it is a
One
crazy, hectic,
expensive,
exotic. I mean,
yeah.
it's so much energy though.
I know. I love it there.
Yeah.
Oh, I thrive there.
Yeah.
I don't do much sleeping, but it's an amazing
Too much to
city.
do.
Yeah, yeah. It's a city that never sleeps. So,
yeah.
and if you've got the personality that you don't want to miss the party, it's really hard to sleep.
That's the place to be.
Yeah.
That skyline when you fly in,
Oh,
it's beautiful.
so awesome.
So-
Yeah, day or night.
Right.
So, anyways, let's
Yeah,
get back
sorry.
to
I
the
digress.
film festival. The photos that you posted on social media when you were there, and all of the excitement of it was just awesome. What is it like to be involved with a film festival in such an amazing city, a city that's known for art from around the world all the time?
Right.
The City of Dreams, people fly in there. They're still flying in, and they're still taking ships into port there with the hope of making their dreams come true here in the United States.
Right.
So what did it feel like for you as the writer, producer, director to know that you were taking your grandfather's and your grandmother's story and gifting it to the world through a harbor that they could have come through had they chosen the United States?
It was an incredible feeling being able to go to New York City. I've always thought, had I looked, I graduated high school in 1998. I was like, you know what, I never thought I would be in that position of I could be taking a short film to New York City.
Yeah.
So it's very cool. It's kind of like be persistent.
Was it a little surreal?
It was, yeah. It was like I'm going to be in Manhattan with something I created, something I sat down in 2005 and started writing every night at a coffee shop. Bought a bottle of wine, and drank that while I wrote. And just coming up with this script and then turning it into a short film. And before that, I had been in Los Angeles, and there's producers that like it, so I got to raise money for it. But knowing that I took. And it's the night before the film festival, I told my wife, I go, we were at dinner, and I go, just to think about this whole process I've been through, where this script has taken me to both coasts. I've been to LA, and now I've been to New York for this, and.
Well, you've been back overseas to walk some of the ground, and while you were developing and creating it,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, going
so
through
it's
Poland,
literally
yeah.
taken you around the world.
And I was able to see the barracks where my grandfather was stationed at before they went against the Russians. Hasn't been kept up too well, but it was just kind of neat, just a very neat moment. Very, I don't know. I guess there are emotions there.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was getting ready to ask you. I've talked with others that actually served in World War II that were over there and that have gone back years later. Yeah. And some of them have said that they can, when they walk in, they still smell the smells. It comes back to life for them. Like it's just really intense. They're not able to stay. They think that they're going to be able to handle it, and they just can't. You don't have that point of reference, but the emotions, can you try and describe what that felt like when you were visiting the concentration camps? And I know that there was a church that was a cathedral church that was very precious in the history of the grandparents, and you got to tour that also. How did it feel to be walking on the ground and in the steps that they trod in such an oppressive time, and then you were back there as again a marker of the focus of never giving up on what they believed in and who they were and who they serve, as a testament to the survival? How did that feel? What went through you?
You know, I look at these because when you walk into Auschwitz, they're in the buildings. They have photographs of people who went to the gas chambers, and they've got, and it's an emotional thing. It's very sad because they've got flowers behind the picture frames because that's the like people who have family. That's the last time they knew of where their grandparents or their great grandparents were or parents were. And so I was wondering, I always look at them, I'm like did they ever come, cross paths with my grandparents? Now, of course, my grandparents weren't in Auschwitz, but thinking before that, maybe they met them somewhere in town. So it's just a mix of emotions. Now, I can't go back to Auschwitz. I'm in Birkenau. I can't go back just because of what it means. And I remember the author of Night, Eli Wiesel, he talks about how he goes back and there's spirits, there are ghosts, there are
I've heard that many times from people.
And I remember he was with Oprah. I remember seeing on Oprah, he was with her. And sadly, he passed away not so long ago. But it's just, going through all that, I just can't imagine having to survive that. I mean, my cell phone battery dies. I'm a mess for a couple hours until it's charged. But what they went through is just, it just blows my mind, the hate and the ignorance on that part. And it's still today, there's still all that. So it's a crazy roller coaster of emotions. That's what it is.
So you have the finished product. It's been shown and screened in New York City.
Yes.
And obviously it received some wonderful reviews because you have been out in LA and you are working on it being purchased and produced for a larger screen.
Yes.
So if you could have a conversation with your grandparents today, what do you think their side of that conversation would be with you?
Their side of the conversation. Okay, I would probably, I don't know, I think they would probably say that, I mean, there's finally people are paying attention to this. A lot of, when I had spoken with survivors, and they're Polish Catholic survivors, the number one question with every single person was, why have we been left out of the history books? Why have people forgotten us? So I think not letting their memory die, kind of just keeping them in our thoughts and our prayers, what they've been through is, So.
And they'd be proud.
I would think so, yeah.
So many reasons to watch Forgotten.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if people want to see a preview of it or want to check out some of the poster that was used to help promote it in New York, where would they go to find this information?
You can go to my website, which is adamminnick.com.
Okay.
Last name spelled M-I-N-N-I-C-K. And I also have started a website just for the film. So I'm currently building that and adding to it. So I will have contact information in there. I'm going to be attaching the video. The video is on YouTube. You can actually watch the short film on YouTube.
Okay. So look for Forgotten on YouTube.
Yep.
And they can go to adamminnick.com.
Yep.
And once the website is officially completed, I'm sure you'll post there and they will be able to link right to it.
The website is up, I believe it is forgottenpolish.com. I have to recheck that because I just created it.
Yep.
And it is published, so it's open, it's available to log into. But yeah, I will have that, I'm gonna have a link from my website to that website as well. So that's easily accessible.
So let's circle back here. When I first introduced you, I said you're a man of many talents.
Yeah.
You work in the world of education. You teach social studies. And then you have this family history that has created a film. So your world has been your story, just in different steps, through comedy, through writing, but it all started with education and relationships with family.
Yes, yeah.
And that is what you're doing for our kids. You are building relationships, encouraging that family bond through the choice of working in private school.
Yep.
And you're continuing to encourage us to ask questions and research and make sure we know our history.
Yes.
And when we first met, when I walked away, I remember that was what I was thinking. I was like, ooh, I need to keep up on this. I need to continue to
I'm glad you did.
remind myself of what is our history and who all are affected and involved. Right. So thank you so much for coming to set today and
you're welcome.
For telling us your story, your family's story, and for giving us the opportunity to celebrate your success with your film. I know that it's going to be going much farther, and I can't wait to see who the characters are that will be working to advance the cause of the history that this is going to be. It definitely will not be forgotten.
Right, absolutely.
So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sharinda.
And thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you the next time. Until then, be well.